kicking things off really where we should when it comes to motorsport in the UK, and that is with the CEO of Motorsport UK. So please welcome the first guest that we have here on Autosport International Connect, ASI Connect. Here he is, Hugh Chambers. Hugh, thank you very much for joining us.
A very good morning to you, Bryn. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's a very exciting room you've got there. Like we always see with BBC News and all the other news channels, we get to see inside people's homes and things. Where are you coming to us from, Hugh?
Just outside Marlow. So we are just moved Motorsport UK to Bicester in South Oxfordshire. And we've moved from our long-standing venue, which was just down near Heathrow. So luckily I find myself equidistant between the 2 points.
It's got a nice commute for you, nice commute. Now, for anybody who isn't really familiar with the role of Motorsport UK as the governing body, what is the role that the organisation really plays, and why is it so important? And also, perhaps, I think, Hugh, why is it so fundamental to national motorsport here in the UK?
Well, Bryn, national governing bodies, I suppose, historically have largely sat in the background. If you think about the genesis of governing bodies, they've really been there to set the rules and regulations to make sure that different teams could compete on a level playing field, and subsequently international federations meant that people could compete around the world, and that's true from athletics to tennis to football. And that sort of basis in rules and regulations has been fundamental. And with motorsport, there's a huge element of safety that is absolutely paramount, and that has improved enormously over the last decades. And we're very proud of all that work that we've done. But fundamentally, the role of the governing body has shifted, and it's moved from that rules and regulations into being much more of the custodians of the future of the sport. And really what we see ourselves as Motorsport UK as being responsible for the long-term sustainability of motorsport in the UK. Just in terms of kind of the scale or the background to motorsport in this country, we are probably one of the one or two largest motorsport countries in the world. We're part of the International Federation, the FIA, which I'm sure everybody knows, and we're designated as the official ASN for the UK. That means that we've got responsibility to organise and permit all events for four-wheel motorsport in the UK, and that's also governed by government statute. So by Act of Parliament, we are designated as authorised to issue permits, and that's on obviously closed events, private venues, but also closed road rallies as well. So we have, again, through our relationship with government, the ability to close down roads and to host rallies on public roads, on the public highway, which has happened relatively recently. In terms of size, we've got a direct community of about 60,000 people, of which there's around about 45,000 competition license holders. That's spread across 13 different disciplines, everything from rallying, circuit racing, karting, sprint, drag, trials. The list is endless, and the permutations within that is absolutely vast. And fundamentally, at the heart of all that, we are a membership organisation. We're made up of 720 clubs, motorsport clubs, across the whole of the 4 home nations. And each of those have got their members, which play a part in that community. So we've got this fantastic community, 10,000 marshals that support the sport, over 1,000 officials, everything from stewards and clerks and scrutineers, medical teams, rescue and recovery, and so on and so forth. So a massively complex ecosystem, and at the heart of it, Motorsport UK helps that community to be organised and to make sure the sport is safe, fair and fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And just gives an idea, doesn't it, the scale, not just how it's going to work, but the sheer number of moving parts, the number of people you have to have conversations with and to instruct as well. But Hugh, it was great to see motorsport really up and running in 2020. There was a moment, I think, when it came to me thinking, as I was watching all of my motorsport and other sort of sport roles really start to drip away over a 3 or 4 week period. It was a worry that motorsport wasn't going to happen, but it did happen in 2020, not just in the UK, but across the world as well. And here's a little look back at what happened here in the UK.
side, Frederick Lubin and that Hotchkiss grabs it. Up the inside of McGuinness as they go down the straight. Simpson with the 4 points really turned home. Not making his move, good position. Oh, he's on the roof.
An idea, doesn't it, really, of what it looked like in 2020 at the end, and good to see so many different forms of motorsport in that picture there. If we bring Hugh back in, Hugh, when we talk about the moving parts and how it worked last year, when we came to ASI 2020, which seems like, I don't know, a millennia ago really, when the world was completely different, did you ever think that you'd be faced with not just a pandemic, but a situation like we have had to face in the last 12, 14 months?
Well, of course, none of us really understood the scale of the impact that this was going to have when the news began to filter through about this new virus that was emerging in China. And I don't think any of us would imagine that 12 months on, we'd be where we are now. But I think it's an absolute testament to the resilience of the motorsport community and also the inventiveness and innovation that has allowed so much of the sport to continue. And take my hat off to the Formula One teams and the Formula One organisation, the way that they managed to travel around the world last year and to put on the show and to complete their World Championship. And then domestically, we managed to complete championships, domestic championships, vast majority of our different disciplines, and as you know, GT as well, and the British touring cars, which fulfilled, keeping it on the screens, keeping people entertained. So it was an extraordinary feat to manage to complete so much of motorsport last summer.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we come from a fan perspective as well, when we look at motorsport too, because it had a huge impact on every single part of motorsport, because teams and drivers rely on sponsorship. Sponsorship relies on maybe some kind of TV footage or some sort of fronting, really. And if that's removed, it's also fans being at the venues to see the cars, to see the sponsorship, and then there's hospitality. It's a huge, big circus that goes around with every single part of motorsport. With Motorsport UK and the guidance, how did that work? Can you give us a brief idea, really, of how the guidance came to you at Motorsport UK, who you got to work with to come up with the methods that you came up with to get motorsport running? And really, I suppose as well, when we look at motorsport and elite sport, how you determine which sports are classed as elite sports? There must have been a lot of different conversations going back and forth.
Yes, of course, there wasn't any roadmap last spring. We closed down motorsport in March 19th, and it restarted on the 4th of July. And looking back on it, that sounds like, well, you had loads of time to figure this one out. But of course, there was no pre-existing plan how you go about it. And everything that we did, and in fact that we do now, has to be within the context of the government legislation and the government guidelines. We've built a very, very good relationship with the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, the DCMS. And I think previously, motorsport has not necessarily been that connected into the government sporting lexicon. And through the pandemic, we've built up an incredible dialogue and a very productive dialogue. And I think that dialogue has demonstrated to government just how well organised motorsport is. It's at the very heart of what we do is safety. And the organisation with, mentioned before, the thousands of people, the volunteers that give up their time freely to make sure that sport is safe. It meant that once we developed those guidelines, it was rolled out through the clubs, it was rolled out to the organisers, the venues, and executed absolutely brilliantly. And that meant that we had thousands and thousands of competition starts last year. Your question around elite, of course, domestically, and as we move towards the 29th of March, when motorsport will restart in this country, domestically, if it's an organised sport organised by the national governing body or sanctioned by the national governing body, that extends beyond elite. The elite side is more to do with international travel, and there are still constraints around that. But from a domestic view, as long as it is a Motorsport UK permitted event, then last summer, and as we move into the unlock in just 10 days' time, that does extend beyond the elite level.
Absolutely, yeah. I was actually thinking as well of the different conversations you were having with the different car clubs and the different events and the different championships, the different organisers as well. And I know at ASI Connect over the next couple of days, there are panel discussions about the pandemic, COVID-19, and how we move beyond COVID-19 as well. And Motorsport UK are really in the middle of that, and I guess trying to keep everybody as comfortable as they can possibly be.
Well, you know, I mean, I think one of the great things about the motorsport industry, and I'm very fortunate, I've spent a large part of my career working on, if you like, the other side of the fence, working at Pro Drive, so working in Formula One and WRC, and surrounded by some people I've ever met, the engineers who are so inventive, always looking for ways to adapt as the rules and the regulations change. And I think that same DNA has come to the forefront when faced with the pandemic, and it's allowed the industry to actually look at a lot of the things that we do, the way we go about organising motorsport, and actually improve it. And so we've announced that we're going to be changing the way that we approach scrutineering, for example. You know, I think for a long time there's been a bit of a frustration about the standard way that we've gone around scrutineering, with really very limited time for a scrutineer to check a vehicle before it goes onto the circuit. What we're now doing is pre-authorization, people's self-certification, and it's going to allow the scrutineers to do a much more in-depth analysis of cars on a regular circulated basis as people at different events. You know, remote timing, remote sign-up. There's a whole host of different things which have come through from the pandemic, which we'll be adapting for the long term. So I think it's a bit of every cloud has a silver lining. You know, I think we are looking for ways to reduce bureaucracy, reduce the red tape, and make it easier for people to get into the sport and also enjoy the sport.
It's interesting, isn't it, how motorsport really, I think, prides itself on being at the forefront of innovation. And when it comes to a pandemic and a situation that we've had, as you say, the last 12 months, 14 months or so, the fact that motorsport is used to change and used to adapting puts it in a really strong position when changes are forced upon it.
Absolutely, you know, and I think the way that the community comes together as well, you know, sport, I'm very fortunate, I've worked in all sorts of different sports, including the Olympics, and there's a certain DNA at the heart of sport and sports organisations and clubs, and it is that collective sense, that passion for what you enjoy, whatever your sport might be, and I think the motorsport community is amongst the most passionate of any sports communities. And people absolutely adore this sport and give up their time freely to it. And when you've got that energy, you've got that desire to get it running and to get it working, I'm absolutely sure that the sport will bounce back really strongly this summer. And certainly in terms of the number of people we've seen taking out their competition licenses this year, it's actually well ahead of where we'd hoped that it might be at this point. So for anybody who's wondering whether or not there are any competitors out there who are desperate to start competing, I can assure you there are thousands and thousands of people just absolutely waiting to get going.
Which is not just a relief, but I think a welcome bit of news as well. I was thinking, because I mentioned earlier on about sponsorship and how motorsport really is, most levels of motorsport, it is self-funded, whether that be through hunting sponsors down, using hospitality methods and wining and dining people. With that aspect of society being removed that we've had for the last 6, 7, 8, 9 months and things, I wondered whether that would have a real negative impact on the uptake for 2021.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and obviously the shop window of motorsport, the showcase of motorsport, is Formula One and the other professional championships and series in the UK. BCC, British GT, you know, these are the ones that you see on television, have media profile. In terms of volume, in terms of the number of drivers, it's relatively small. You know, as I said before, we've got around 45,000 competition license holders, and there's probably no more than maybe 100 drivers in this country who you would deem as being professional racing drivers. So the vast majority is club motorsport, and that's the heartland of what we do. And each one of those competitors owns a vehicle. They get them refettled. They buy equipment from suppliers. So the industry is much, much broader than the sponsored, hospitality-driven professional side. But at the same time, we absolutely need that high-end professional level within the sport, because that's what drives the profile of the sport. It people into it. People want to come in and start karting because they've seen Lewis Hamilton winning his 7th world championship. You know, you need that aspirational level to it. And the industry overall, the motorsport industry, is recognized by government as being so massively important. You know, we've got about 40,000 people that work in motorsport across the UK, and that's earning a living, quite apart from, as I mentioned before, all the enthusiasts who pay for it out of their own pocket. So there's a responsibility to make sure that the industry survives and it thrives, and that when we come back, it can really bounce back in good health.
Yeah, I was wondering as well, it seems likely that people who maybe had one form of motorsport ahead of them with maybe a slightly bigger budget have looked slightly off to a parallel championships, which is slightly less costing, because ultimately people who want to race and want to take part in motorsport will just do it. It doesn't matter what level, they will just get out there and do it. And I think that's a testament really to the industry that we're all working in. When we look ahead then at 2021, this year that has started kind of silently really, it's just happened. We've seen that some championships have pushed back slightly. We've just saw the news recently that Le Mans has decided to move their date to August. Has this delay to the start of the year, really, 29th of March, enabled you at Motorsport UK to change things, to implement things and get yourselves ready for what we hope is going to be a big bang, a massive launch when we can get up and racing?
Yes, of course. It's lockdown 3, and we've now got a lot of experience with the clubs and the organisers and the venues to restart motorsport. We've dusted off the guidelines from last year, updated them, modified them where we've need to because of government legislation. But I think we're extremely well prepared. And last year we saw absolutely bumper grids in circuit racing through the summer, and now we're restarting on the 29th of March. By the middle of April, we're seeing clubs reporting that they have sold out their grids. I know a Keep historic racing series at Brands Hatch in the middle of April have had to put on a second grid because they're so oversubscribed. So there is the demand, there is the bounce back, and I really do think through the summer we're going to have a fantastic summer of motorsport.
Lovely music to our ears, I'm sure. When it comes to the future then for not just UK motorsport, but I think motorsport as a whole, how do you see it changing? Because there's such an eye now, isn't there, on sustainability and future technologies. I know that ASI Connect has got a number of sessions dedicated to this alone. So do you think that it obviously is going to shape motorsport, but how do Motorsport UK roll with these changes, and where do you see the future being?
Well, it's a very good question. I mentioned at the beginning, I see our role as the governing body as the guardians of the long-term sustainability of motorsport, along with the FIA internally. And part of that is how motorsport fits into society. And I think historically, motorsport has done a fantastic job of a technical leader in transportation technology and innovation. And I think that's where motorsport needs to go now. I think it needs to be relevant. I think it needs to show technology is affordable and adaptable. And we've got this sort of dilemma between a huge club motorsport that's absolutely based upon a car park of vehicles which are internal combustion engines. And the next 9 years, you won't be able to buy an internal combustion engine in the UK and across many parts of the rest of the world. So we have got to address the bridge between these two worlds. And I think actually, one of your speakers, I think at ASI, is Paddy Lowe, talking about synthetic fuels and the next generation of fuels that are coming through. And I think there's some really exciting technologies there that may well leapfrog the electric revolution. And you may well find over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years some really alternative ways of propulsion. And I'd love to be able to find green ways of continuing to use the technology that we've currently got.
Yeah, I think it'd be lovely to still hear V8s and set V10s flying around circuits, wouldn't it? And as you say about Paddy Lowe, there is a chat coming up with him over the next couple of days. Now, it's interesting to see. And actually, if you think about it, the internal combustion engine could still be a thing using petrol or forms of petrol if the electric world is doing amazing things, because it will enable carbon zero to be a thing with fuel propulsion still leading the way, we hope.
Absolutely.
Now, what about anybody who is wanting to get into motorsport? They don't necessarily have deep pockets and long arms. There are many initiatives, aren't there, for them, but can you just pick out a few, really? It isn't all about the most expensive forms of motorsport.
Well, it's a great question, because I mentioned before Hamilton, as the ultimate ambassador for UK motorsport, inspiring a generation of kids getting into karting. But karting has become now pretty expensive at the highest level. And, I think it's traditionally been seen as the obvious way in which you get into motorsport. So many other alternative ways which require very, very little investment. And there's a whole set of different disciplines, different types of motorsport, which we're actually putting under the umbrella of the term streetcar. And the reason that we use the term streetcar is that you literally can, in the vehicle that you can park outside your house, it's road registered, you don't need a helmet, you don't need fancy overalls, you can go along and do something auto solo, which you've probably seen. It's round the cones, a little bit different from an auto test, you don't have to, so it's perhaps a little bit less technical than an auto test. You can do it with a friend, so you can double up and both of you can use the same car on the day. Entry fees, maybe £20, £25 for the day. Lots and lots of fun. I've done those, and I think they're an absolute blast. So we're going to be promoting streetcar across a whole range of different areas, in different forms and formats of rallying as well, where you can road car. So you don't need special equipment. You don't need to trailer the vehicle to the circuit. And I think that's a great way for people to come into the sport.
Fantastic stuff, Hugh. Thank you very much indeed for giving us your time this morning. It's great to see just where the motorsport world sits here in the UK.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure. And thank you very much to Motorsport Network for putting this virtual show. I think it's a great show of confidence in the industry. Thank you.
Great stuff there. Thank you very much there to Hugh Chambers, the CEO of Motorsport UK. And if you want to find out more about Motorsport UK, you can find their website, motorsportuk.org. So lots going on here over the next couple of days at ASI Connect. Remember to use this time wisely, get networking, visit those exhibitor booths and more. We've got more panel discussions on their way coming up, in fact, in the next 3 or 4 minutes. We'll see you in a few.